All right, so yeah, I'm here today to talk about every developer's favorite pastime, debugging, right? We all love it, want to spend as much time as possible doing it. So to get started, a little bit about me. I am Cecilia Martinez. I'm a community lead at Replay. Replay is a open source debugging platform, replay.io, if you want to check it out. I'm from Atlanta. Well, I live in Atlanta now. If you have talked to me at this conference, I have probably tried to convince you to move to Atlanta because I am a huge fan of the city, just a little bit north of here. I am involved in a lot of community organizations. I love teaching. I love helping people in tech. So I'm part of the GitHub Stars program. I am the chapter head for Atlanta Out in Tech, which supports the LGBTQIA+ community in tech, of which I'm a part. I'm also a volunteer with Women Who Code Front End. It's a global virtual chapter, and we have events every month. And I like to say I'm an unofficial Cypress ambassador. So there is an official Cypress ambassador program, so I can't claim that. But before I joined Replay in January, I was at Cypress for 2 years and still a huge fan of the framework, the team, the community. And I know we talked a lot about testing here at this conference, and so I won't get too much into that, but just to kind of echo, regardless of what platform you use, whether it's Cypress, Playwright, Jest, VTest, like Deb said yesterday, we're all friends. As long as you're writing tests, I'm very happy. So you can follow me on Twitter at Cecilia Creates. That's also my GitHub username. So yeah, feel free to follow me if you'd like to ask me any questions or get any information. Oh, I do also want to note that these slides are public. They're available if you want to check them out after. Slides.com/CeciliaMartinez/debuggingVue. All right, so why am I here talking to you about debugging, aside from the fact that I work at a debugging tool? But I'm talking here because I wasn't always very good at debugging, probably like a lot of you here may feel the same way. So let's start by raise your hand if somebody taught you how to debug. So whether it be like in a class, boot camp, if somebody sat you down and was like, these are the steps that you need to follow when you hit a bug and how to use all the tools. Okay, so a couple of hands, but that's pretty much what I expected. I also was not taught how to debug, right? It's kind of like you're coding, maybe you're learning how to code, you hit a problem, and all of a sudden it's like, what do I do now, right? So I like to call this we kind of use the debugging dartboard, which is you kind of just like pick a tool, like hope for the best. Console.log's in the middle because it's everyone's favorite. I still use it constantly. You may comment out code to see is this broken? Maybe. Does this fix it? I don't know. Googling, pulling up random things. If you're advanced, you may know how to use debugger and breakpoints. I did not until like January of this year when I had to learn how to use them. But really it's like there's not a good methodical approach to debugging for most cases, and especially not one that we're taught or that we learn. But we do it a lot. We spend a lot of time debugging. So like who here has debugged in the past week? Okay, and keep your hand up if you say that you probably debug every day that you write code. Right, okay, so yeah, so to write code is to write bugs. Like, I have this really cheesy joke that I didn't include in the slides, but basically it's like, what do you call somebody who writes bugs? And it's a software developer, right? Everybody does it. But we're not really taught how to do it, right? But developers spend up to half their time debugging and maintaining software. We talk about how developers are more like mechanics, just like trying to keep the app running, versus architects who are actually building out new features and functionality. So we spend all this time doing something, and we're not really taught how to do it, and especially not taught how to do it efficiently. And debugging is very complex. And the reason it's complex is because our applications are complex. There's a lot of application complexity now. If you think about, you have an add to cart button, right? Very common use case, e-commerce site. You click on that button, nothing happens. There are so many things that happen when you click that button where something could have gone wrong. Click the button, there's an event listener, it's function to handle that event. Maybe you're setting the state to loading while it's adding. Fires off an API request. In the back end, you have a handler for that, does some business logic, maybe even checks a third-party API to make sure that item is in stock, updates the database, sends the response back, you handle the response. You update your front-end client storage. Maybe you turn off the loading state, and then finally the DOM updates, and that little one pops up, like that you've added it to the cart, right? So if you click that button and nothing happens, our apps are so complex that you have to identify at which point in this chain that something went wrong. That's a lot. And if you don't know where to start and you don't know what tools to use or how to begin that process, it's very complex. But the thing is like, frameworks actually add to this complexity. You know, if you were just using like vanilla JavaScript, HTML, and CSS, like that's one thing. But we're actually using a framework on top of that. So it really looks more like this, right? You have maybe like event emitters that you have to program. Then you have, if you're using a state machine, you're dispatching actions, which then hits your reducer. And maybe there's like a side effect that fires off from that you have to write. Maybe you're tapping into lifecycle hooks to ensure that maybe the component doesn't render quite yet, and you have all this async logic being happening, and your error handlers, and then you have all the other things that like the marketing team makes you put in around like what led somebody to add this to the cart, like what was the search term, and all of those things that are happening at a given point, which increases the complexity because you're using a framework to develop. Frameworks are great. They make all of our lives better. Love Vue, whichever one you're using, but they do add complexity to the debugging process. So we can fight this complexity by identifying patterns within the frameworks that we use. So let's take a look at a pattern that most of us are probably familiar with. How many of you have seen this error? Type error, X is not a function. I should probably see a lot of hands if you've ever used JavaScript. So. What are some reasons why this could happen? Feel free to shout them out. Okay, yep, so like there's a function, like maybe there's a typo in the function name, right? Somebody said unnamed. What's another reason why this could happen? Right, so you're using the wrong prototype method, right? Maybe you're calling something, you're saying toString, but it's not something that could be a string. Any other ideas? What? Yep, exactly, yeah. Trying to call a function, but you didn't mean to call it a function. It's not supposed to be a function declaration or an execution, it's supposed to be something else. Yeah, so we see things like that, right? Typo in function name, wrong prototype, variable is wrong type. You missed an import, right? You're trying to call a function from a library that you imported that you forgot to actually add to the file where you're calling that function. Now that we're using a lot of packages and libraries, we see that a lot too. So the thing is, though, is like, how did you know that? How did you know that when you see that error message, that it could be one of those things? So you know it because you've seen it before. There's a pattern that happens that you encounter over and over and over again. So Jen Creighton, aka Girl Code, on Twitter, highly recommend you follow her. She's also the host of the Single Threaded podcast, did a talk at Reactathon in May. Yeah, May. Last month, which you can watch on YouTube, it's available. And she did talk about debugging async JavaScript. And she said the best debugging tool is knowing something well, right? So there's some things that you just don't know until you know. And it's hard to get there unless you just like brute force it until you find it in the docs, or maybe you've asked somebody for help and they were like, oh yeah, like it's because you can't use toString on that. That's not the right object. Like, did you not memorize every single potential method for every single object in JavaScript? Like, what? So that's the thing, is you don't know something until you know it. And that's kind of one of the problems around debugging. But what you can do is you can use debugging tools and use the right process in order to better understand how you can identify these patterns within the framework so that when you see an error, like the same way that when you see X is not a function, you say, okay, yeah, that's a pattern, I've seen that before, or at least I know how to investigate that pattern. So let's take a look at a Vue pattern with debugging, and it's debugging reactivity. So reactivity in Vue. I'm going to show you an app. In the next slide, it's a video, but I'm going to set it up before I switch. It is a kind of like a resource library that I built back in October, November, because I was trying to get up to speed on Vue 3 and decided to revisit it because I was like, there's going to be a ton of bugs in this thing. I didn't know what I was doing, and I need to find some Vue bugs. And whenever I need to find bugs, my own code is the first place that I look. And so In this video, we see essentially it's like a Vue resource library. All the resources in here are actually Cypress resources because that's just what I'm familiar with. I have the Vue DevTools open on the right-hand side so you can kind of see the components that I'm working with. There's a search function, has an error message, it has a search input field. You can browse the resources. There's an app resource card component that's being reused. And there's an add form, which doesn't have a submit button because I never finished this app. But how many of you have used Vue DevTools before, by the way? Awesome. Yeah, so Vue DevTools, really helpful for understanding to see like what your components are. It has the inspector view. That's what I'm showing here. So again, you can see the error message updating live. You can see the search input updating live as I'm interacting with the website. And then when I go to browse, you can see all of the resource cards that I have, as well as the resources that are being stored in the parent component of my browse gallery. Also just want to give a quick shout out to Vue DevTools. It sounds like a lot of you use it already familiar with it, but I've given versions of this talk for React and for Angular. And Vue DevTools is the only one I've seen that has that really cool timeline view that shows all of your component functions that run. And so yeah, it's really, really nice experience that y'all have for developing. So how can we better understand the relationship between state changes and component renders in order to identify some patterns here? So the bug that I kind of encountered was when I click on I hit the plus button and I have my performance tab open and I can see everything rendering. I click the plus button on one card, like 3 cards down, and everything updates. That's not great. Like I don't want all of my cards to render every single time I interact with one. So like a lot of you are probably like already like, what is this? Or you already get the answer. But again, this is kind of a simplified version in order to show this pattern. And so in the Vue DevTools, in the Performance tab, I can see that whenever I click one button, 5 processes kick off to render all of the 5 cards. And so how can we better understand why these renders occur? Well, Vue gives us some debugging hooks. Anybody used the debugging hooks before? Couple of hands. Okay, cool. So this might be new for many of you then. So there is onRender triggered. There's a few others essentially that you can tap into and view the event that caused that to occur. So this is the onRender triggered debugging hook that you can throw in your code. This is my resource card. You know, it's rendering, so I want to understand why it's rendering. So I've added it inside of my setup. And I just threw a debugger statement in there. You could also console log the event or inspect it, depending on what it is that you're trying to do. But I wanted to stop the execution of the code so I could take a look in DevTools. So here in this video, I click on the plus button. The debugger triggers because it rendered, that app component rendered, the trigger was re-rendered. I can see the call stack on the left-hand side if I wanted to better take a look at what was happening on the functions call. But I'm more interested in like the event that took place. And so I have a suspicion that everything is starting again from the top, which I can see. Again, I click the plus button and I can inspect this event. So there's an event that I can then dig into. I can see that the key that triggered it was value. And I can also see the target of that event and the title, which the title is actually my very first resource. So when you're debugging, you want to have a hypothesis, maybe multiple hypotheses, and you want to validate that hypothesis along the way. Scientific method type stuff, right? And so I validated that, yes, when I click a button 3 cards down, the very first one triggers, and I can see that. And then the key word here for me was value, right? And so I'm like, okay, I'm trying to learn Vue 3. I'm getting up to speed. What do I know about that word value? And it refers to reactivity. If you have a ref, if you have a reactive, you tap into that with value. And so how can I get a sense of like what is causing that? So I go back to my DevTools and I look at my inspector. So in the inspector, you can see the resources, how it's being stored inside my setup function within the browse gallery component. And so who here can see the problem here? I have an array of 5 resources, and I'm storing it in a ref. There's a little ref in gray right next to that. All right, so refs are designed for primitive values, right? Strings, booleans, something that is going to be like one thing. Whereas a reactive you use for objects arrays that you can take advantage of deep nesting. So when I update my value for my resources, I'm updating everything at once. Like I can't tap into resources 0, dot votes and kind of like update just that function, or sorry, just that property. My Vue app doesn't know that a lot of these are the exact same. It's updating the entire thing at one time. So every single time that that updates, everything else re-renders because it doesn't realize that it's actually the same information. So this isn't really like too big of a deal as it is right now. There's 5 resources and maybe it adds like some milliseconds to it. But if I had a watcher associated with this ref that then fired off like an async function or an API call, or if I had 50 cards that were all re-rendering because I changed one single property inside of that array, then you could have race conditions, you could have severe performance issues. So understanding the relationship between the reactivity in your application and how state updates affect re-renders can be a really important pattern when you do encounter a bug like race conditions or stale state or something updating and then updating again with the wrong state because of a race condition. These are all patterns that occur because of how you use the framework, not necessarily because of the underlying code itself. But the important thing is that I learned something from this bug. Maybe I learned something that a lot of you already knew. But I like to say that maybe the real treasures that was the bugs we fixed along the way. Because every time you fix a bug, you learn something. Who here has fixed a bug and afterwards was like, that was a total waste of time. Like I didn't learn anything. Okay, not counting typos. Not counting typos. So not counting typos, that's very fair. But in most cases, you're like, okay, like at least I reinforced the syntax there. Or like, I did not know that that was an async function. Or I didn't know that it was only supposed to be used for a certain type. Or I didn't know that you don't have to use .value in the template in order to access your reactive properties in Vue. So every time that you do fix a bug, you learn something, and you better understand the relationship between the framework and your code itself. A couple of other patterns to keep an eye out for, things that I've seen. I spend a lot of time helping people debug things. Silent errors. Errors are a beautiful gift. I am so excited when I see a call stack because it gives me a place to start from. Again, the worst thing is when you hit that add to cart button, nothing happens, nothing in the console, no idea where to start. Got to start going through the chain, right? So make sure that you don't cover up errors. Vue has some built-in configuration error handlers. Try not to like cover that up or re-implement it or hide errors in your application so that you can see what's going on when something happens. Another is lifecycle hooks, right? So lifecycle hooks have to be called synchronously during your setup within Vue 3. If you're using a combination of options or composition, or if you're in the process of migrating, understanding when those call, and also this is something where Vue Dev Tools can be helpful for you because you can literally view each of those hooks that is firing and see what the order that they happen in and what happens when they update. You can view the event that took place, and again, you can also view what triggered it. Some of the things that aren't listed here that I've seen before include understanding the relationship between parent and child components and how data is passed between those. And then also multiple sources of truth for state. If you have a global store, then you also have component level state. If there's any overlap or competing values, if you are updating things from 2 different places at the same time, those are all things that I've seen that caused issues. So you want to have separation of concerns, but then have things together that make sense to run together. And then there's also just async issues. That's just JavaScript. We all can't escape it. We all work with JavaScript. So being aware of some of those, watching that talk by Jen will really help there. So what about the framework itself, right? So we talked about your application. We talked about how you're writing the framework code. What if there is an issue, or you suspect there may be an issue with Vue, or how you are interpreting what Vue will do to your code? So let's go back to these lifecycle events, right? This is a video, a Vue DevTools. This is the initial load of my application. And I can see all of these, init, render, patch, mount, render, init, patch. Under the hood, Vue is like running code to make these things happen, right? And something could be going wrong there too. So the level of complexity is really more like this, because we have our app code, we have the framework code, and then we have the framework code itself. So it's like a horrific Inception style thing where there's so much JavaScript running and we don't necessarily know what the problem could be. So if you need to debug something happening in Vue potentially, how do you solve that? We know there's GitHub issues in these projects. Again, everybody writes bugs, including framework developers. So if you have a suspicion that maybe something isn't being implemented correctly, how do you debug that? Well, you could add some breakpoints and console logs to the Vue code that's in your NPM package and try and step through it and see where the issue is. File a GitHub issue, but it may not be reproducible, and I'm sure there's a lot of them. It's tricky. All that sounds not great. You could also record your application with replay. So replay lets you record your application to create a shareable recording via URL with built-in debugging tools. It's free for individuals, open source platform developed initially. The Mozilla Firefox DevTools team started Replay. And what it essentially is a runtime recorder. So with a Replay browser, it's actually a browser. You can record your application and everything that's happening inside the browser, including all your HTML elements, your JavaScript execution, the user events, network requests, and including the Vue processes that are running in the browser in your dev environment while you're building up your server and while you're interacting with your application. So, everything gets captured, including those Vue processes. I mentioned I sharing the slides out. This is a link to a public replay. So like I said, it's shareable via URL. So you can come in here, you can play with this if you're interested. But this is a replay I recorded of that Vue application that we just showed. And so this probably looks like a browser, right? Once you make a recording, you can open it in Chrome. This is Chrome right here. And you can see some of the similar dev tools that you're used to in the browser. So I have my sources, which shows everything that was captured during the recording, anything that ran, including that Vue NPM package and some of the Vue processes. So let's take a look at kind of what's going under the hood. This is just kind of a recording of the replay itself. It's a recording of a recording. And this is the viewer mode. It kind of looks like a Loom video. It's replaying what happened on the screen, and you can click through the different events and go backwards and forwards in time. On the DevTools tab, this is where we're going to see more what's going on under the hood. I still have my viewer. I have a console. I have my Elements tab, which lets me inspect elements in that video. It's not actually a video. We're repainting the canvas based on the code execution that we recorded. So you can hover over and you can interact with any of those elements the same way you would if you were running it locally or running it in production. And again, you can interact with those events and see what's taking place, the network request, everything. For each file that gets captured, we record all the function calls inside that file and how many times they executed during the recording. So this is the Vue router file that's handling my router. I can see that there's a create href function that gets called 15 times. I don't think I navigated 15 times, so it's kind of interesting. I'm curious why that may be happening. I can go to that line of code, I can see it was hit 15 times, and I can inspect that function and see if there's something that's triggering it that I don't expect. But the real cool thing, and my favorite thing about Replay, the reason I joined this team, is that you can add console logs, everybody's favorite debugging tool, to the recording retroactively. So this is the DOM bundler from Vue, and it has a function that I found called create element. And essentially, this is what's creating the actual HTML elements from your Vue code. It ran 198 times, and I can log to the console every variable that's in scope at that point in time when the function ran. So I'm adding a print statement here. I'm logging tag and props. And then for every time that this runs, it creates a dot on the timeline. I can jump to. I can see that There was some H3s that were created that didn't have a prop. There was some divs that were created that were related to the article that was coming from the resource. And I can jump around to those points in time and evaluate. So if I have an element that's being created the wrong way, maybe I thought it was going to be an H4, but it's coming through as an H5, I can go and I can find that moment in time where that element's created, and then see what the props were and trace that call stack back within the Vue underlying code itself. So that's replay. The idea of recording a runtime, like the actual compiling process and the build process, was not my idea. Most good ideas are not mine. I just steal them and tell other people about it. But Matusz Brzezinski from the XState and Stately team, if any of you have ever used that tool before, aka Andorus Rake on Twitter, he likes to use replay. He's also a TypeScript contributor. So we have a node recorder as well, not just a browser, but we can record node processes. And he recorded the TypeScript compilation process in order to debug it, and found that there was a bug with a discriminant union type where the union was being split up the correct way when it was a function declaration and an arrow function, but not for a method declaration. And so he was able to see that by seeing, okay, when I have these two functions, this runs. I don't see it running when I have the third one, and I can't trace it back. And he was able to debug that process. So that story is on our examples page, replay.io/examples, along with a lot of other debugging examples. We have mostly React, honestly. React DevTools and Redux DevTools is built into Replay, so that's kind of like a lot of people use it for that. But again, there's also some general JavaScript, debugging CSS, and debugging GraphQL call examples on there as well. So you can start to identify some of those patterns, right? See like what are some bugs that other people run into and how did they fix them. But regardless of what tools you use, I just hope that you take away from this is that to embrace bugs and do it intentionally and from a place of learning. Again, every time that we have a bug, we learn something, it's valuable, and that's okay. I encourage you to practice debugging. It's a skill that you get better at. I was not very good at it. I've done a lot of it over the past 6 months in this role, helping people debug. I hop on calls with them and say, bring your bugs, let's look at them together. I do a weekly live stream where I live debug on Twitch, and people watch me struggle with CSS because I'm still terrible at it after 15 years. But practicing really helps. Everybody has a backlog of bugs that they can go to and just pick one and take a look at it in in Vue DevTools, or record it with Replay. I also encourage you to pair. Like I said, you don't know something until you know something, and so combining knowledge is helpful. A lot of people don't like to do that. They feel like weird about their bugs, or that process is just frustrating and they don't want to bring somebody else into it. But the earlier that you can collaborate, the better. You saw in the replay, I decided to add comments as I go along, and you can link a comment to a line of code. So I can say, I don't know what's happening on this line of code. Can somebody help me? Or this is weird. Why is this running 25 times and I only clicked the button once? And you can collaborate and get some ideas there. And then also helping other people. So whether it be Stack Overflow, in communities like Women Who Code or Ref Code, or answering questions, or even people on your own team, people who could use some mentorship, helping other people answer things can help reinforce some of the patterns that you already know, and then also help you understand how other people observe your application and how you use it. But just please throw out that dartboard. Don't just pick something and hope for the best. And yeah, thank you so much. I've been Cecilia Martinez. Cecilia Creates on Twitter. Again, I do a live stream every Friday on replay.io/YouTube, also on Twitch and Twitter. And then you can catch the slides at the link on the screen. Thank you.
Two questions. Well, I'll make it one. Can you interact with Socket.io or WebSockets? And can you inject things when you're replaying?
Okay, so I heard the socket part. I didn't hear the second part. Sorry.
Can you inject things when you're replaying? So let's say a value gets pushed in and it's wrong. Can you inject? Can you change the value like you could in DevTools when you're messing with CSS or anything.
Gotcha. Okay, yeah, thanks. Yeah, so WebSockets are all captured as long as they're going in and out of the browser or happening within the browser. Yes, so for example, you can't debug what's happening on your back end, but if it's in the browser, it gets captured. And the second question, so right now, being able to retroactively add console logs is the first step, right? Being able to then make changes to the code and see what would happen is possible, definitely, because we record everything and we're literally replaying your code execution. So that's something that's like kind of on our roadmap as the next step, is being able to test changes the same way that you can when it's running locally, but within the context of that recording. So, thanks.
Cecilia, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.